And now I would like to invite our two distinguished guests to conclude these 3 days. And I will first invite Luis Alfonso de Alba, UN Special Envoy for the UN Special Summit, Climate Summit in September 2019, and Florent Menegaux to come, CEO of Michelin, to come on stage with me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Please. So transitioning from Generation Y to why do we have a big climate summit in September? So, Mr. Ambassador, we have this mobilization in September organized by the UN Secretary General. And so you're mobilized 24 hours, 7 to make it happen. So what is about the summit in September?
Well, first of all, it's a summit for action. I think that the Secretary General has been very clear that it is time to action. We have reached a level on which, because of the gravity of the situation, no more speeches are needed. He's asking all participants to come with a plan that will identify not only actions and plans, but also the partners with which those plans could be achieved. It is quite important that the summit is an occasion for leaders, not only governmental leaders, but non-governmental leaders, business sector, academia, civil society, to join forces. The summit is going to take place in September, the 23rd of September at the General Assembly.
In New York?
In New York. And the aim of that summit is to get out with these actions that could be identified that will make it possible for us to reach the goal of the 1.5 latest report on the IPCC, which demands a reduction of emissions of 45% by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050.
Yes, so we know about the challenge. And this summit is actually there to respond to science as well. Absolutely. And make sure that commitments from government are being implemented and that we can increase ambition as well with all stakeholders you mentioned, cities, businesses, leaders from all around the world, and NGOs, trade unions.
Exactly.
So this is a big momentum. And so as Florent Menegaux with Movin'On, as it's the first international platform on sustainable mobility, how do you see the role of such a platform with all participants here to respond to this call from the UN?
So I just want to first share with Mr. Luis Alfonso de Alba that we have the same concern and we have the same feeling of urgency. We really need to act. It's time has come from moving into intention, realizations. Now we really need to address the matter. So the good news is that Movin'On has been set to do that.
Yeah.
So of course, our two summits are very complementary because, of course, the climate summit tackles many more subjects than the mobility subjects. However, the mobility, we know mobility has a big contribution towards climate change. And therefore, we, in Movin'On, have a say into this issue. So my proposal to United Nations is to say, why don't we build bridges between summits where you tackle broader issue, you make sure that governments take on board their commitment and start to act, because COP21 was many, many years ago already, and the numbers are not going in the right direction.
4 years ago, COP21. So.
Exactly. So, and the numbers are not going in the right direction. So it is really time to act. Here, Movin'On, we believe in more mobility, mobility for more, and less impact. And that's where we all gathered. I am sure everybody agrees with that. So it's not a Michelin statement. It's all the stakeholders willing to address mobility issue. So if we can build bridges between United Nations, Movin'On, United Nations, I think we can put many more things into motion.
And you're speaking of bridges, and we've seen, for instance, last year at Movin'On Summit, the toolbox, decarbonization toolbox, that is, and responds clearly to this matter of ambition, implementing the Paris Agreement, and being aligned with its ambition and what science is asking us. So how do you feel about science-based targets being considered for cities, countries, companies?
Absolutely. When you want to move into action, you need to understand what you are contributing to do through your actions. So you need to measure what you're doing. Corporations, we do that every day. We have to be measuring the impact of the actions. So science-based target gives us tools on a very complex issue to be able to assess the impact of what we are doing. And after all, because if we act with no impact, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking action that have an impact.
So science-based targets as guiding action with measurable data and also a guidance to make sure that we are aligning actions and engagements from different sectors with the Paris agreements. And so, Luis Alfonso de Alba, when you prepare the summit in a very short time manner, with the urgency to act, and we've seen the IPCC reports and the calls from science, we are seeing as well countries reaching for some of them, able to put more on the table in terms of ambition, more quality as well to prepare their commitments. What and how do you respond to this invitation of bridges, building bridges between Movin'On and all the participants and stakeholders here with the UN special summit, climate summit, in September?
Yes. Oh, well, first of all, I welcome very much the opportunity to work together. I think we share values and we share objectives. And it is quite important to look into the summit in September as the beginning of a process, not the end. The beginning of a process on which we will need to scale up action to a level that is not seen before if we want to reach the goals. And that level of ambition will never be reached if there is no full collaboration between all the stakeholders involved into this process. So joining forces with the private sector, with the academia, benefiting from the experiences of the sector, and particularly on mobility and transport, it's fundamental. We will need to be very precise, and we will need to commit to do a follow-up of our actions. Because remember that according to the Paris Agreement, 2020 is a critical year. It's the year on which we will demonstrate the validity and the urgency that has been identified through the Paris Agreement to address this problem.
Thank you. And how do you see a kind of indicator of success for this UN climate summit? The last climate summit with all head of states was, of course, during COP21, but just before we had in September 2014, a big summit organized by the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, which was a milestone as well to prepare COP21. So to prepare 2020, what would be an indicator of success for this summit in September?
Well, I think the integration of different stakeholders into very concrete actions that could be implemented the day after would be the biggest measure of success. To show that the process is still alive and it's very strong, even though we have to recognize some setbacks at the international level. Political will needs to go back to the highest level possible, and the Secretary General is very much willing to play that role. So success would be not only to demonstrate the validity of Paris, but to demonstrate it through actions, not more speeches.
Through action on specific themes, concrete themes that the summit is covering. Can you give some examples of themes that will be addressed during the summit?
Well, we will have an agenda that will cover a number of topics, some of them that affect in a cross-cutting manner different sectors, different areas, but certainly we are working first to get a balance between mitigation and adaptation. We need to remember that adaptation is a priority for many countries, and the increase on the impact of natural disaster needs to be dealt. On mitigation, we will certainly need to look into the major emitters and those that may become major emitters soon if they do not change the trajectory. We need to look into innovation when it comes to energy, when it comes in general to the industry sector. We need to look into the specific situation of cities and local governments and how to help them. We need to make a better use of nature-based solutions not only to capture carbon,
CO2.
but also to avoid the degradation of land, etc., to make a better use of ocean. We also need necessarily to look into problems that have a social and a political connotation or impact, because we need people to be involved.
On board, the social
The
components that I
Secretary General
mentioned.
has been very clear. We cannot tax citizens. We need to tax polluters. We need to make sure that the society in general support a policy against climate change. We need climate change to be at the center of the national policy, not just an issue for the environment ministries. It needs to be a central piece of the planning. It needs to be fully supported from the financial system. We need to make the resources available, resources that are going to be needed coming from the public and the private sector, because the amount of money that is going to be required is quite considerable. But there are also opportunities. There are solutions, and I think that's where Movin'On comes, because you have been able to identify a number of solutions.
Yeah.
So it's not only expenditures that need to be done and support that needs to be provided by governments and legislation, etc. It's also the capacity that we will have to show where the solutions are, and solutions that are reachable for different levels of governments.
Opportunities and well connected with Movin'On and what we've seen in the last 3 days. Florent Menegaux, how does this resonate to you for the next Movin'On Summit in 2020? As you said, a critical year for the climate agenda and sustainability more largely with a biodiversity nature 2020 agenda.
So, of course, we had a pre-meeting with Mr. De Alba before this one, and what we have discussed is what kind of commitment Movin'On could make towards the effort of United Nations towards addressing this climate issue. Of course, you cannot summarize the mobility, sustainable mobility, only to its impact in CO2. However, it is a very important impact. So part of our work, and we all agree, because that's not only me, but this
The ecosystem
entire
needs
platform
to
of
be-
Movin'On has to agree that what we could do is have an open dialogue with the United Nations, where you tell us what are the key targets that need to be achieved, and then Movin'On can mobilize its whole entire ecosystem towards providing key metrics and key actions that could be implemented in a pragmatic manner that would have an impact towards the objective of United Nations.
Merci Florent Menegaux. Merci Luis Alfonso de Alba.
Merci à vous.
Thank you.
Alors, c'est une invitation à rejoindre cette mobilisation mondiale pour l'action climatique. Pas seulement le CO2, mais aussi l'adaptation, parce qu'il y a des enjeux très forts pour les transports en matière d'adaptation. Dans des pays en développement aussi, investir dans des infrastructures qui ne soient pas ensuite détruites par des événements climatiques, c'est essentiel de penser la mobilité aussi en termes d'adaptation. Et donc, nous allons vous laisser, Florent Menegaux, conclure ces 3 jours. Et donc, merci à tous
Thank
d'avoir
you.
suivi
Merci.
cette session.
And thank you.
Merci.
Thank
Merci
you.
beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci. Merci bien.